everyone, welcome and thank you for coming back to Listening In, the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society podcast. My name is Faye Blackwell and I'm the Head of Engagement and Development at the Society. In this series, we want to provide the opportunity for you to listen in to some of the conversations that I'm lucky enough to have every day. That is with a variety of wonderful people and organisations all working in the field of mental health and well-being. Please be aware the topic of suicide is mentioned in this episode because today I'm talking to Chris Sibley, co-founder of the OLLIE Foundation, an organisation that offers training, events and resources to help people cope with mental health challenges and to prevent suicide. In our conversation, Chris describes how the OLLIE Foundation came about in response to a dreadful experience in his own life and those of his co-founders, when they all met after losing children to suicide. Chris describes how his son TJ lived a life of kindness, humour and compassion, and how TJ's legacy now motivates and inspires Chris to do the work he does now. That work not only involves a whole host of initiatives, training and resources that the OLLIE Foundation offers, but it also means talking about his own and listening to others' lived experiences. What impact does repeatedly telling his own story have on him? And how does he keep himself safe and well in that? And what challenges are there in keeping a charity running and able to do the work it does? We spoke in early October when Chris had returned from a much-needed break after working harder than ever in the period leading up to World Suicide Prevention Day. So I suppose just in terms of your own background, and I don't just mean your lived experience about things suicide related, but just you as an individual, as a person, how would you introduce yourself to people? What would you say about yourself? What's your background?
Yeah, my background was 36 years in the shop fitting construction industry as a project manager and then latterly account director running global accounts for large shop fitting organisations, which was one of those jobs that at the time it always felt so important. Because you do all these things, you're earning money to support the family, all those things that you feel are important when you're young. And it's only as I got older I realised actually it's not really that important. Too many of us value things instead of people, and but that's clever marketing, clever advertising for decades have done that. The need to climb the greasy pole. Right, I must have the next thing, got to have the next thing. So I was on that like a lot of other people. And then just realised as I got older, this is ridiculous. Actually, things like that don't make you happy. You can only be happy if you find contentment. And you can be content with anything. If you're content living in a shed, you're content living in a shed. If you're content living in a 5-bedroom house, then you're content. But I realised that actually it was more about being content. So putting life before work. But for years I didn't.
Yeah, I think many of us have had similar experiences, and that almost cultural, societal message, isn't it? The more you achieve, the more you have, the happier you will be, the more content you will be, and we often find that's not the case, don't we? So what was it, the OLLIE Foundation, your experience that led to that took you out of that world, or had you left it beforehand anyway?
No, I was still actually in the world working until the end of 2023.
Okay.
So even though we started OLLIE in 2016, so I lost TJ in 2014, met the other two founders at SOBS, the Bereavement Support Group, and we decided to try and make a difference. And so we ultimately started a charity. There's a much bigger story to it than that, but, shrink it down. So we started the charity. But as a grassroots charity, it was all about, okay, we need some people to run the organisation, but the rest of us had full-time jobs still. So we were trustees, we talk at events, man awareness stands all around our paid employment. But then last year, it got to the place where the OLLIE Foundation needed a position filled. And I sat down with my wife, and with her support, because it wouldn't have been possible otherwise, we just went, right, financially, is this doable? That was the first question. And as soon as the answer was yes, there were no other questions. It was right, I'll leave my career, I'll start working for the charity full time. So that began the last week in November last year.
Gosh, I didn't realise it was that recent. Okay. So before that, you were juggling those two roles to some degree. Yeah. So I know I said when we were arranging this meeting, it's entirely up to you. I absolutely understand the exhaustion that can come of keep telling a story. And I know you were so generous and say, that's okay. That's, it's what I do. And I'm very happy to do that. But if I just ask you, a very open question for you to respond to as much or as little as you like about TJ, about your experience and how that then resulted in this incredible organisation called the OLLIE Foundation.
Yeah, fine by me, Faye.
So what would you like us to hear about TJ as a person and your experience of losing him?
Well, the thing with TJ, and I'm sure every parent would say this about their child, right? But he was magnificent. As a human being, he was truly magnificent. And a lot of that magnificence actually came to the fore after he died, although it was always kind of obvious. He was kind, he was thoughtful, he'd always help others. He'd never have a bad word to say about anybody. But what came out after his death was actually the amount of other people he supported at school. It turned out he was the person people would go to if they were struggling at school.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they'd go to him, and the messages afterwards were just unbelievable from so many people. His teachers, unbeknown to me, TJ was a stand-up comedian, and he'd written a script, and he used to practice it on the teachers. Now, I had no idea about that until he died, and the teachers told me and said he was genuinely hilarious, because he was so funny. But he had all these things that I had no idea about. On his last day of school, he stood up in front of the entire school and gave an unscripted speech about how great school was. Now, again, I only found all of this out after he died because he never talked about that, ever. That was his thing, So he was magnificent, absolutely magnificent young man. Even on his last day, or the last day of his life, he went round visiting people, almost like saying goodbye, I guess, but they didn't know it was saying goodbye, just dropping in on people. And I only know because the police interviewed every single person because they wanted to fill all the hours in on his last day. But even to the extent, part of that day was spent sitting with a homeless guy, sharing a cigarette, one headphone each, listening to the music and having a chat on the bench. So that's the kind of guy he was. And the very last thing he did, literally 20 minutes before he died, there was a young lady who he'd never met, but he knew her brother vaguely. And she was coming down some steps on crutches with a full leg cast. And he went over to her to see if she was okay, because she was struggling to walk. And she'd had a crash on a moped. That's why she had a broken leg. But anyway, he ended up walking her home to make sure she got home okay. Stood outside her house chatting for a while. I'm now friends with them and the mum and dad because the mum saw him out the window and thought, who's that man talking to my daughter? And he stood there talking to her, made sure she was okay, and then turned around and went on his way. And that was the last person he ever spoke to, that young lady. So even the last act was helping somebody else, which kind of about sums him up, really.
And to help people understand, am I right? We're talking here about a 16-year-old young man?
16, yeah. He was 16. He'd left school 4 weeks before.
Goodness. So to show that level of empathy and compassion and sensitivity, what a legacy for him to have left.
Absolutely. And I may have said it to you before, Faye. What I do is driven by TJ. When people say to me, how do you do what you do? I can't honestly answer that. I know what they mean when they say how. They mean physically, how do I get up and do it every day? I honestly can't answer that. When people say, why, then that's easy. It's what my son would have done. It was all about helping people. So even if that wasn't naturally me, which it is, but even if it wasn't, I'd have to do it because it's what he'd do. If the roles were reversed, he'd be doing what I'm doing.
To be able to live your life as you do now in memory and in honour of him is such an extraordinary thing, Chris. It really is. And I mean, I know you and I have had many conversations before, and often we get quite carried away when we chat with each other. We've got quite similar personalities, and sometimes it can go all manner of places. But to hear you speak in that way so openly about TJ, it's a real honour to hear you and to feel a sense of getting to know of the type of young man he was too, and how the world is undoubtedly, a lesser place without him in it.
Thanks, babe.
And so you experience that dreadful loss that only those of us that have lost somebody through suicide, I think, can ever fully understand. And even then, it's unique and personal to each individual.
Yeah.
And at some point after that, as you've already sort of very briefly outlined, you come to this place of meeting other survivors of bereavement by suicide and creating the OLLIE Foundation. Do you mind helping me understand and the listeners understand that length of time between those two extraordinary events in your life, the loss of your son and then the creation of this supportive organisation in memory of him?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny how things align sometimes. So TJ's inquest was 6 months after he died. And the only reason I even knew about SOBS, on the day he died, I sat in A&E at the hospital waiting for the mortuary to open. And it was very early in the morning. And the sister came out and sat next to me and was chatting. And she kept saying, I know exactly what you're going through. Now, and I kept saying, I'm sorry, you haven't got any idea what I'm going through, but thank you for sitting with me. And she stuck a card in my pocket and said, you might find that comes in handy at some point. Now, it's important to note that I found out, I actually went back to the hospital about 2 weeks later to take the nurse some flowers for being so kind. Now, she wasn't there that day, unfortunately, but I did learn that she did know what I went through because she'd also lost a son to suicide. Okay, so she did know what I was going through. But what happened, that card she put in my pocket was from an organisation called SOBS, which is Survivors of Bereavement Through Suicide. Now, so she gave me that card day one, within 3 hours of me knowing my son had died. So I kept that card. For 6 months, I lived in this world of nobody will understand what I'm going through. How could they? Nobody's going to feel like I feel. I went back to work. Work were fantastic. But to be fair, and they told me this themselves, they didn't know what to do, so they let me do what I wanted. So which was what I needed at the time, to be honest. So that was all great. And then I got the date for the inquest because it was delayed because the police were determined to fill every hour. So they wanted to gather more and more information. And then the inquest date came through. And it was the day I decided to go to my first SOBS meeting. So this is literally 6 months from the day he died. And again, it didn't make a lot of difference to me, but I'd had a conversation with the chap from SOBS before I went to the meeting, ahead of the inquest. And he actually said to me, oh, Chris, just so you know, don't be surprised if you don't get a verdict of suicide. Now, I wasn't bothered what the verdict would be because the end result was my son's dead. So he's dead. But I just thanked the guy for telling me that. Anyway, went to the inquest and he got accidental death for a couple of really random reasons, even though it was clearly, he'd intended to take his own life. So I left the inquest, literally drove straight back to where the SOBS meeting was that night. Over the next few months, because SOBS is only hosted once a month, I met Jane and Stuart, the other two founders. And not everybody could do what we did. I appreciate that. lots of people can't because the grief is just so much. But for whatever reason, the three of us, once we got to know each other over a few months, decided we have to make a difference, although we didn't know what that meant. We just knew we had to make a difference. We couldn't just go and try and carry on living our lives as we had before. That's not possible, clearly. So what options did you have left? Not to carry on living your life, not an option. So we have to do something. So we kicked it around for a while, talking about raising money for this organisation and another organisation. We had a couple of meetings with some organisations that already existed in other parts of the country to see if we could open like a southern branch. But it wasn't possible. These organisations weren't big enough at that time to do that. So we thought, well, we're not going to let it die or let it lie. So we'll start a charity. And right at the very start, when we started OLLIE, which is One Life Lost is Enough, the very first training we decided to deliver is assist training, which, anybody in this space has heard of assist. But at the time, 8 years ago, you had to go to Canada to be trained to deliver assist, which you now don't have to do. But you did then. So our first effort as a charity was to go on a big fundraising purge so we could pay for 2 counsellors to fly to Canada to be trained in assist, which we then delivered for free to anyone in Hertfordshire who wanted it.
Oh, I see.
So that was the very beginning. That was the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that meeting of like minds between the three of you came really quite quickly. Is that fair to say, that getting to know each other and then understanding that you're coming from the same position of, we need to turn this into something else, we need to do something about this?
You're right. Well, I guess I don't know what to compare it to compared to when other people have started things, but we founded the charity towards the back end of 2016. September, it was officially registered. So in my instance, that's 2 years after my son died. So I guess that's probably quite quick. Stuart's son died after TJ. So for Stuart, it was even quicker.
Even sooner.
So, but it didn't seem quick. And I don't know if it is compared to others. It just seemed natural. It was, we have to do something, because anyone who's been bereaved by suicide, friend, family, anyone who's been impacted, you really don't want anybody else to ever experience it. Or we don't. We didn't, we still don't. And we will do everything we can to try and ensure that people don't experience that. So that's what kind of drives us on and made us pick up speed quite quickly, I guess. Yeah.
Well, there's no right or wrong time, is there? Everybody's different. Everybody works at their own pace. And I suppose it's a bit like cooking, isn't it? Some meals you can do in 15 minutes and some take hours, and the end difference is what matters. How long it takes doesn't really matter in that same way.
Although you've never seen me cook. I can't cook anything in 15 minutes or an hour, so I wouldn't worry.
But I think I meant more actually in terms of what you all then did. I suppose it was not. I didn't mean so much quick as in getting the ball rolling, but even just that relationship with each other, getting to know each other, trusting each other, understanding each other's own experience. As you're still going through your own, it feels like there was I hate using the word bonding, but you know what I mean, a connection there that clearly was established. And I suppose perhaps you look back now with everything that's going on with the OLLIE Foundation and think, well, it was meant to be.
It absolutely, because you're right, actually. So Jane, one of the founders, she helped facilitate the SOBS group. So she was one of the co-hosts. Now, as it happens, Stuart and Jane, the other founders, currently facilitate a SOBS group. So they do that as well. So Jane was one of the kind of co-hosts, and I'd already been going to SOBS for a couple of months when Stuart, unfortunately and sadly, had to attend SOBS. I wish I'd never got to meet them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but Stuart was there, and at the time we had very similar life situations. I lived on my own, but had my children on contact, saw them all the time. Stuart lived on his own, had his children on contact, but we both got on with our ex-partners really well. So I think at the time, and Stuart and I have chatted about this, he saw in me somebody who was similar. Similar life circumstance, similar everything in that regard. So we kind of migrated towards each other within that circle of people. So yes, it worked. Jane was one of the facilitators. Stuart and I were very similar life situations.
There's something really powerful, isn't there, when you meet somebody and it's akin to sort of looking in a mirror. There's that familiarity and that understanding that's there. And sometimes it's not always evident why that is. Sometimes it's really obvious, but it's a powerful and a very special thing, isn't it?
It is. And at the time, once we decided what we were going to do, I remember the three of us sitting there saying, if we save one life and stop one family going through it, then it will have been worth it. Now, we had no expectation when we started for the longevity of the organisation. We just had this thing about save a life, save the devastation in a family. So the fact that 8 years later, you and I are chatting now and we've got all of the courses and all of the things that we do kind of blows my mind a little bit because we had no idea at the start.
Yeah. So maybe now's the perfect time then to look at where that experience, that dreadful experience that you've gone through, as did Stuart and Jane, you've come together, you've created this incredible organisation. And I feel, Chris, that it's very unique in what it does. You have found very specific areas in that work of suicide prevention that the organisation does. And I know there's a wider team around you. Obviously, I've met Deborah, and some of the other people that help you in the work you do. But again, if anybody listening isn't familiar with the work of the OLLIE Foundation, what aspects of that would you guide them towards, point them towards as what's important in your work?
That's such a fantastic question, because if ever anyone says to me, can you put in a nutshell what you do? That would be the biggest nutshell that you've ever seen. Because like you can from lots of other organisations around the country, we can train people to be mental health first aiders. We can train people in assist, but you can go to lots of organisations and get that training. So that's just something that we do offer. But from our background and our in-house team, we have medical, academic and lived experience. So we create a lot of bespoke courses which tackle certain elements. So as an example, there's one called Keeping Safe and Carrying On. Now that's all about the biology around what causes anxiety. Okay, and it shows you why chemically you get anxious and you're constantly in flight mode, but then gives you really simple techniques to help you control that anxiety and also to stop and intervene in panic attacks. So that's very specifically created for anxiety. Mm-hmm. We have a Planting the Seed mini curriculum, because this is one which we all see the pressure that our teenagers are under. And I have a teenage daughter, so I live in that world. I see what it does to them and the anxiety a lot of them have and various challenges. So our Planting the Seed initiative is a mini curriculum for primary school children, not about mental health, not about suicide prevention. It's all about growing lovely sunflowers and how you have to nurture plants in the same way you have to nurture yourself so they can grow tall and strong. That's fundamentally what it's about. The children love it, the teachers love it, but our hope is, sad as it might be the case, that these young children will grow up knowing they are good enough, knowing they don't have to look like social media tells them they have to look. Uniqueness is the thing to be embraced, because we don't all want to be the same. But unfortunately, a lot of teenagers we see feel they have to be the same, act the same, look the same, want the same things. So all the uniqueness has come in bashed out of them. Mm. So we have Planting the Seed, which is fantastic. We have a new session, which isn't actually on the website yet. It's brand spanking new. And this is
heard it here first.
Yeah, exactly. This is exclusive. It's for grassroots sports clubs, and it's well-being training and sessions for the coaches and managers, because when they're dealing with young people, it touches on lots of topics, from anxiety to potential signs someone might be struggling, if there are any. Just gives managers and coaches a better understanding of things to look out for, because in sports clubs, they build a real rapport. They're teams, aren't they? They talk to each other. So we're literally just finalising that, having been still under wraps, but having been commissioned by somebody to do a programme. That will all come out in the wash who the somebody is, but having been commissioned.
And is that local, Chris? Is that local to you? Is that national? How does that work? Will some of these campaigns work?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Everything we do since COVID is national.
Okay.
Because it's probably, that's a good point, Faye. Pre-COVID, we were a grassroots charity based in Hertford, delivering face-to-face training in Hertfordshire. Okay, sorry, based in St Albans in Hertfordshire, I meant to say. So that was how it was. When COVID came, as like everything else in the world, everything moved online. So we suddenly became a local charity with a national reach. Because it was online, people would join from across the country. Then we had people joining from Australia and America and South Africa, and it was unbelievable, actually. It was a little bit mind-blowing. But we're still this grassroots charity, still a small team delivering stuff online. But there's lots of organisations now where we will go and deliver face-to-face, and that can be anywhere. Literally can be anywhere. It doesn't actually matter to us. But we find with a lot of the hybrid working these days, people actually want online sessions because they can then bring their team in from anywhere in the country rather than having them all sitting in a room.
Yeah.
So it's either or, Faye, online or face to face. And there's so many other sessions that we offer. There's a transitions to university workshop, which is all about when you transition from school to uni. When you're at school, there's that invisible safety blanket. If I don't turn up for a lesson, within 10 minutes, somebody's phoning somebody saying Chris hasn't turned up for a lesson. Now, quite often as a student, you don't know that safety blanket's there, but it is. When you go to uni, if I don't turn up for a lecture for 3 weeks, nobody's phoning anybody. Okay, but you're kind of oblivious to that as a young person because you're not aware the blanket existed in the first place in most cases. So transitions just prepares people for the things that are different. So and brings me on to another initiative, but it's to do with medication. But as an example, when you're at school, you're a child, your parents know the medication you're on 9 times out of 10. When you're at uni, you're a young adult. So you can be prescribed medication and nobody else knows because you're a young adult. You've just been prescribed the medication, which leads me, it's a nice segue, into our safer prescribing initiative and prescription safe plans. Now, before anybody thinks, oh my God, that's anti-medication, it's the opposite. Our safer prescribing is all about making people informed and aware and safe when they're on medication. Now, you and I know virtually every single medication in the world has some side effects, whether that's antibiotics can upset your stomach, everything. And we started working a few years ago on prescription safe plan. And I'll be honest, we didn't come up with this bright idea and think this is interesting. We started to get approached by too many parents of young people in educational settings who, unknown to the parents, because they're young adults, had been prescribed antidepressants for a whole range of reasons, lots of different reasons, and then really tragically had tried to end their own life within a few days of starting them, and some tragically died. This made us very curious a few years ago, so we started to look at it, working with public health, working with GPs and pharmacists to make sure everything we did is in line with NICE guidelines. And we initially created a prescription safe plan, which was focused on antidepressants, because that was the medication we'd been approached about by parents. Because you probably know, a lot of antidepressants, one of the known side effects in the literature is they can give you suicidal thoughts. Now, that doesn't mean you wouldn't take the medication, but you absolutely should be 100% aware of that when you take the medication, when you get prescribed it. So, and then you know what to do if you experience the side effects. So that's actually what our prescription safe plan does. It's a little booklet, a 4-page booklet that just ensures whenever someone's dispensed the medication, they know what the possible side effects are. They know exactly what to do if they experience them, i.e. get a med review back at the doctor. And there's emergency contact numbers in there. So it's just all in one little booklet. You can actually download that for free from our website. Mm-hmm. So it was created for antidepressants. But then we just get more curious. Well, what other medication has got similar side effects? So a lot of antipsychotics have. Montelukast for asthma, Roaccutane for acne, and even more kind of tellingly in this day and age, a lot of ADHD medication all have this known side effect. Now, there was an ONS poll in the not too distant past that stated 60% of patients dispense medication leave not knowing the possible side effects. Doesn't mean they weren't told. It might be they just weren't listening. But if you think there's 60% of people leaving unaware of the side effects, so they might be on antidepressants and they're feeling worse, but they don't know what the possible side effect is, that can lead to a really bad place. Mm. So our safer prescribing initiative is to keep the people being dispensed informed and safe, but also to protect the dispenser from moral injury. Because if something did tragically happen and the dispenser is thinking, oh my God, did I take them through all the side effects? That must have such an impact. Yeah. So it's to protect everybody in that sphere.
Mm-hmm. And to just come back to the beginning of that, Chris, so you are saying that came out of a pattern that you were starting to notice in terms of the volume of people that were contacting you saying that this had happened. It seemed to be, obviously, you had to do more research and investigation into it, but it seemed to be a pattern you were hearing about whereby in some cases there were people that would be starting on antidepressants, obviously going back to, I know you've mentioned obviously other medications since, but antidepressants that went on to make attempts on their life, and there was the possible chance that it was the antidepressant, it was the side effect of the antidepressants that was part of that.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Parents were approaching us because after it happened, after their event would happen, then they'd find out it was one of the known side effects, and they'd contact us and say, we didn't know this was a known side effect. Well, it is in the literature, but who reads the literature? It's kind of there, but it needs to be slap bang in your face so you're really clear. This is a possible side effect. If you experience it, don't just sit there. Come back to the doctor, get a med review. So that's exactly it. People started to approach us. And the moral injury piece, there was an actual example of a young man who did die within 4 to 5 days of being put on the medication, because the negative impacts are often felt much quicker than the positive. So I've learned, so I've been told. And even in that case, the dispenser did say to him, I'll see you in 2 weeks. So he thought he was doing the right thing. He just said, I'll see you in 2 weeks. But that young person didn't get to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So again, how does the person who dispensed the medication, how do they think? They think they've done the right thing. You'll come back and see me in 2 weeks. But the young person didn't get to the 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And as far as we know, was unaware of the possible side effects. Mm-hmm. So it's just to keep everybody safe, because the medication itself makes so many millions of people's lives bearable and livable. They need the medication. That's so it's definitely not an anti-medication thing. Yeah. But I think when we first started, quite often we'd hear, you're just anti-medication. Mm. And it's like, no, we're not. But now, come forward to 2024, there's stuff in the press almost every week about the possible side effects of lots and lots of medications. So it is being more openly talked about.
Yeah, and it is. It's that preventative work, isn't it? And it's about awareness, and it's about information and knowledge, empowering people, helping them make the right decisions, or just simply helping them understand what to look out for. And should certain side effects start to happen, including feeling suicidal, then perhaps get that checked out with the right people. ask the right questions.
You're so right, Faye, because as a tiny little example, I was invited to talk at an event, which was fine, lived experience, what the OLLIE Foundation does, safer prescribing, etc. And during that, I mentioned about Monty Lucas because it's just part of what I was talking about. Unbeknown to me, but I found this out later, there was a GP in the audience. She didn't know that Monty Lucas had that possible side effect. But what she was able to do was think, I've had patients come in experiencing low mental health and wanting to know if I can help. But she was instantly able to link together the fact they were on Monty Lucas. Well, she had recently started. She then called them back in, did a med review. They've changed their meds and they're okay. So that's only a tiny little example where you literally don't know who's going to benefit from anything you say. It's just proved it to me, you know.
Absolutely. And actually that word benefit is something I was just going to say again, that caveat, that being sure that people understand that you're not saying there's anything wrong with these medications. They are absolutely the right thing for the right person sometimes, if that's what they choose to do. I know there's other arguments for and against, and that's, another time, another conversation with somebody else perhaps. But absolutely, some people will gain. The young man that you talked about that within 2 weeks was no longer there, but had he been able to wait, had he been able to seek support if he was having those feelings and thoughts, then perhaps past those 2 weeks he might have seen some benefits coming to him. So it's really important that I think we do, as you have already done, stress this isn't an anti-campaign by any stretch. It's just an awareness campaign.
Exactly that, Faye, because I always use antibiotics as the classic, having had loads over my lifetime, like we all do. Okay, we all know with antibiotics, they can upset your stomach. Okay, they can. We know that. And if you use them for years, they literally destroy your gut biome. But you take them because you need them. But we also know with antibiotics, if you suddenly get a rash with antibiotics, you need to go back to your doctor because you could be developing an allergic reaction. So that's the analogy I use. We all know about that with antibiotics, and people are informed, and it's to keep you safe. This is exactly the same. Stay informed, keep safe.
Yeah. And it's bearing in mind the fact, I know not exclusively, as we do more and more of these podcasts and we get to understand some of the people that are listening to them, I expect still, first and foremost, it's going to be counsellors, psychotherapists, or people with an interest in mental health who are working in the profession, as well as others that are listening to these conversations. So like myself, we're seeing people every day in our rooms who are already on antidepressants or who are considering going on antidepressants, and we are watching them go through that process. And I know for a fact that I've sat opposite clients who have made that decision to take antidepressants, and if we've talked about side effects, they've often said, and again, I'm sure we can all hold our hands up to this sometimes, you're prescribed something and you pull out that long piece of paper that comes in the box and you think, no, I'm not even going to look at it because I don't want to frighten myself. Or I don't want to get, how many of us say that?
I've done that very thing, Faye. Yeah, so I'm with you.
Regardless of what that medication is. We think, I know that's the doom and gloom, that's the scary part, so I'm just not going to look because I know I need this, I know this is going to help me. But actually what you're doing is shining a light on how important it is, and perhaps particularly for younger people, and their families, and the people prescribing those medications, to understand that actually there are certain aspects of those side effects that would be really important for you to just be aware of.
Exactly that. I couldn't have said it any better, Faye. That's exactly it. It's just knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowledge gives people a position of strength. You know what you're dealing with, and if this does happen, you know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, strength and choice, isn't it? I think knowledge is choice as well, because, at that point somebody could say, actually, perhaps maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not willing to have that risk of those side effects. And others may say, okay, I'm aware, that's great. I'm going to carry on because I know this is the choice that I want to make for myself. So
exactly, yeah.
And I know, just help us understand as well, Chris. So I know, again, you've already alluded to it, but you do a lot of work with, am I right, within the NHS on the safer prescribing?
We work with everybody and anybody, from my next door neighbour to the NHS to first responders to schools, literally anybody, across the gamut of all of the different workshops and sessions that we offer. So we work with all of them. Safer prescribing has actually just been delivered to all of the trainee pharmacists at Manchester Uni. So they will now be using that going forward. We're doing a befriending scheme in Hertfordshire with Mind of Mid Herts, which is in the hospital. So when people are discharged from hospital, part of the befriending services, if they're discharged on medication, they're taken through a prescription safe plan. So that's just starting to happen. And then, to be honest, various PCNs are picking it up. So the GP that I referenced, who heard me speak about Monte Lucas, works at 3 or 4 different GPs practices. So they're now all using safer prescribing. So it's almost like organic growth. So there's some direct stuff and then some organic bits of growth as well. So, but you know what it's like. Unfortunately, there isn't just one person you can go to and say, have a look at this. This would help everybody. And they go, yes, great, tick the box. Have it across the country. It isn't like that. So it's gradually spreading out. That net is spreading.
How does that feel for you and for Stuart and for Jane and everybody on the team to see the impact that's having and to see how welcome that is actually, by the medics, by the prescribers? You're reaching the really important people out there and they're hearing that message and they're putting that into practice. I mean, it makes my heart swell listening to it. What an incredible thing to do. How does that feel for you?
It is genuinely fantastic, and because it's all changing people's lives. But what, even more than people actually downloading it and using it, which is fantastic because that's the point, it's when I might be at some event chatting to people, and invariably you all ask each other what you do. And when they find out what I do and where I'm from and why I do it, they want to know a lot more, which I'm happy to tell them. But particularly the prescription safe plan part and anxiety, actually. There's a lot of people interested in that and the safe plan. But the amount of people after we've had this chat, there'll literally be a queue at the table, maybe 3, 4, 5 people who then all want to talk to me about somebody in their family who is either suffering really badly with anxiety or has just started medication and feels awful. It happens all the time, which is another one of the reasons I'm more than prepared to talk about it all the time, because I learned that there's so many people. If I talk to a room full of people, about a quarter of them will probably know somebody, if they're not themselves, who's on one of those medications.
Yeah.
So it really does instantly help people, because they come over and say, oh, what's this about? And I take them through it and they can download it for free and all of that. And then they message me and say, thanks for doing that. We've been back to the doctors for a review and we've changed it and everything's better now. So, yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic. It is.
And I should just say, actually, that anybody listening to this, as always, we can put links to all of this in the show notes so that people can access or find out more or contact you guys if they'd like to know more about what we're discussing here today, because I know we're trying to encapsulate a very big thing into an hour's conversation. But I want to, if it's okay, just bring that back to you again. It really struck me when I heard you say, so we've already mentioned you talking about your own lived experience and losing TJ, and how that, is well, pretty much the reason why you're here doing what you do now. But also you've really highlighted that when you do talk about these things, what tends to happen is that people then gravitate towards you and tell you their story. And I just wonder how that is, because my first thought was, goodness, Chris, that must be exhausting. In the nicest possible way. I understand that, there's such a, what an honour that must be for you to hear people connecting, resonating, and able to open and share their stories with you too. So there's something really reciprocal and beautiful in that shared telling of each other's story. However, to be doing that all day, every day, how do you, we said at the beginning about, I can't remember if we recorded this bit actually, now I think about it, whether this was before we hit record or not, about turning phones off and looking after yourself in that way. But what else do you do to look after yourself and to make sure that you are staying healthy and you are staying okay in all of this?
It's a really good question, Faye. I have to always have a word with myself as well, right? Because quite often, and you'll know what I mean, people who want to help, you're great at telling other people how to look after themselves, but not always great at doing it yourself. And I am absolutely one of them, right? Yeah, I am absolutely one. So one thing I do have to do, I'm more than willing to talk to anybody at any time. And people sometimes joke, I go to the opening of a crisp packet. Well, it's true, because if there's one person there that listening, talking to me helps them, then it's worth it. That's the whole point. That's why we do it. But you're dead right. Every time I do that, I feel it. They're like tiny weights being put on my shoulders every time I talk about it. And I can feel it over time, over weeks and months. It's like a weight, and I literally, it's tangible. So compared to my previous world where the phone was always with you, in this world, when I'm off, I'm off. I'm completely detached from it. I don't have my phone. I don't look at emails. I don't look at social media. I don't look at anything. And slightly head in the sand, I avoid the news as well. So when I'm off, I am completely off because I have to. I have to come out of that world because it's heavy. It's heavy subject, everything about it. And whilst it's doing phenomenal stuff and helping loads of people as an individual, and you'll know this, if you're naturally empathetic, you get tiny little bits of trauma. But vicarious trauma, I think it's called, isn't it? I think, yeah. So you pick up these little bits. Doesn't mean I don't want to do it, but I absolutely have to completely disengage. Now, during the working week itself, my thing is the gym. It's not It's not for everyone, but my thing's the gym. I go to the gym, empties my head, and then I'm all good afterwards. It releases endorphins. But I know everyone's got their own thing. Some people, it's binge watching Netflix. That's what works and gives you peace and comfort. It's fine, So yeah, mine's the gym though. Mine's the gym.
That's really lovely to hear. I think it's a message for all of us. It's great to hear that you're doing that for yourself first and foremost. But I think over the last few years, that understanding that we have within the mental health profession, the well-being profession more widely, of listening to the voices of people with lived experience, where that's coming in more and more to our work, and necessarily and importantly so. But I think we have to be really careful with that. And that's just really powerful, listening to you, helping us understand what that can be like. Just keep, again, you're doing it because you choose to do it, because you see the importance of it. Nobody's forcing you to do this. And yet still, you are able to say that each time you do it, you just feel something added to the weight you're bearing and carrying, and what you then need to do to take care of that. I think it's really important for everybody to hear what that can be like. And again, I know everybody with lived experience, may have a different experience to what yours is in that, but I'm not so sure that's the case. I think that probably many people can relate to that. And it's really important to identify so that it's never taken advantage of, and that people that speak to people with lived experience are always very mindful of what that can be like.
Absolutely, Faye, because as you probably expect with the other founders, but working for the OLLIE Foundation, I meet lots of other founders of charities in the same space across the country, invariably started because they've lost somebody Okay, so it's the same as it is for the three of us, and they've started incredible organisations, and a number of these people, from time to time, you'll see them publicly talking about it because that's important. I mean, via LinkedIn and things like that, that they're going to take a backward step for a month.
Yeah.
Because they have to. It does take its toll. If you carry that lived experience with you to do good, you're in a really good place to do good because you understand a lot about it. But it's quite common that for a period of time you have to take a backward step. Yeah. And Stuart wouldn't mind me saying this at all. Stuart, one of the other founders, when we first started, he drove it. He was a man possessed, Stuart, driving the OLLIE Foundation forward until Stuart got to the point he didn't want to do that anymore. Not be involved in OLLIE, because he's still involved in OLLIE constantly, but that constant telling the story day after day after day after day. Stuart got to a point, he said, I just need to back away from this for a bit for the same reasons. So I think you're right. I think it's in this field, it's very common.
Yeah. Really important to acknowledge, and even more of a reason that, you know, we feel so blessed and honoured to have you telling that story again today. You know, thank you so much for doing that. As we head into the last few minutes, what next? I know that's a big question in itself, probably. I mean, you've mentioned all of these different initiatives or ongoing campaigns that you're doing, everything from the planting the seed, you know, for those young children, learning about resilience and self-care, all the way through to the safer prescribing and the, you know, mental health first aid, all that sort of stuff. Is it just keep doing what you're doing, sustaining that, or are there new things coming in?
To be honest, it's a great question, and I'd love to give you a really straight answer. A really simple answer, but it's not that simple. So there's lots of things at play. We deliver a lot of courses anyway, as standard, but we also tailor courses and workshops to work with particular organisations. So things constantly evolve. And like anything in this space that we work in, it evolves anyway, even if it's just because statistics and data has changed. So our sessions are never the same because they have to be current, they have to be relevant, and they have to be helpful. So probably the biggest challenge, and I'll say this for us as the OLLIE Foundation, but this would also apply to any other what I call grassroots charities, of which there are many, and they're all doing phenomenal jobs in their community because they're really in the community. You know, the biggest challenge, which is what we're focused on, is actually funding. Because everybody probably knows this, there's been a massive increase in costs for everybody of everything. There's been a massive increase on the demands of the services of the grassroots charity sector. But at the same time, there's been a dramatic decrease in the amount of money being pumped into the grassroots charity sector. So the biggest challenge, I'd say probably for all small grassroots charities currently, is funding. Central grants have been cut. Everything, we all know it's tough out there, so it's been slashed. So at the moment, everything is about underpinning what's there so we can carry on doing what we do. And then the hope is to gradually grow bigger. We're not after global domination. It's about helping people. So it's not like we're a corporate trying to get bigger and bigger. It's not like that. It's just about making sure we can carry on doing what we do, because a big part of everything when we started the charity that we haven't touched on, we host all year a rolling calendar of online workshops and training sessions. Now, what was important to us was that training that changes and save lives can not only be available if people can afford to pay. So our online sessions always have fully funded tickets available. Now, cost is never a barrier to anybody. Just go and get the knowledge. But again, like a lot of grassroots, we rely on businesses that might support us or people to donate to us. So that's probably the biggest challenge at the minute. And I'd say this to anybody, if somebody wants to support a charity, whatever charity that's close to their heart, and it's a grassroots charity, it doesn't take a lot of money. We call it micro donations, £10 a month every month, which if you're on an average salary is 0.3% of your take-home pay. Okay, so it's a tiny amount of money. But for a grassroots charity, if they get 1,000 or 2,000 people doing that every month, That's a huge difference. It's just a massive difference. So that's kind of the focus at the moment, is to try and grow the regular support. Don't get me wrong, the one-off donations are fantastic, but regular support for all grassroots is key. So I'd literally say to anyone, if you support a charity that helps homeless people, and they're a grassroots charity, or one that helps people who have an addiction, the way to really support them is regular small amounts, because grassroots anywhere in the country rely on that.
Yeah, it's easy to forget, isn't it, that, as you say, we all know about the cost of living and how things have changed and how little money is out there. And yet often those are the times that we do turn to charities for help and support. And yet those charities themselves obviously need funds to survive too. You got to be able to put that petrol in the car just to keep it going, haven't you?
You're exactly right. And when you hear, you'll know these, Faye, anyway, but there was some numbers I saw couple of months ago. In 3 years, there's been a 54% increase in people under 24 trying to access emergency mental health support at A&E. Okay, because the state services are overwhelmed, and that's not a criticism. They're doing a phenomenal job, but they are overwhelmed. And then what happens? Those people have to find another form of support. They then lean into the charity sector, and only then do they realise, my God, this is incredible in the charity sector. I can get this support. But you don't know those charities aren't there until you need the service.
Exactly that.
And the reason I say that, just in my local area, I personally know of 6 charities, grassroots charities, all doing incredible stuff, that have shut the doors since Christmas because they've run out of money.
Yeah.
So the people they were supporting are no longer supported by anybody. They're just cast back out into society. But you wouldn't know that unless you needed the support of that organisation and then found there was no support. So that's why I say it's not all about the OLLIE Foundation, please donate to us. Any charity that's close to your heart, that's grassroots, if you can afford £10 a month, it will make a massive difference to them, whether that's saving cats, saving donkeys, homeless people, doesn't matter what it is, because those grassroots charities live and work in the community and have a real impact in that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And community, as many people know, it's one of my favourite words. So, yeah, absolutely. That sense of belonging and connection and people being together and helping each other. What can be more wonderful than that? Just sad that it takes money too.
Exactly. Unfortunately, yeah. I've always said, Faye, if I was rich, I'd help by giving organisations my money. But I'm not rich, like most of us. Okay, so I do everything I can to try and help in other ways. And it's through OLLIE. That's it, really.
And what incredible work you all do, Chris. Really incredible work. And it's been so great to meet with you again today. I know we're talking in a very different sort of situation as to what we normally do. I hope we've done ourselves proud in that. I know you've certainly done the OLLIE Foundation proud, and you've done TJ proud in that too. So thank you so much for giving us your time today. And like I said earlier, we'll point everybody towards, all the links, all the resources that you guys provide, and who knows, perhaps to your donations page as well.
That's fantastic. Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's been great.
Thank you to Chris for joining me today. And thank you for listening in. If you would like to know more about the OLLIE Foundation, including their Safer Prescribing initiative, then the links you'll need are in the show notes below. This podcast is brought to you by the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, a professional home for counsellors, psychotherapists, and over 120 wellbeing organisations across the UK. Autonomy, diversity, creativity and community are at the heart of what we do. We are creating a positive space for conversations with people who share common beliefs and goals, because together our voice is louder. If you would like to know more about the NCPS, please visit www.ncps.com for more information. Please remember to follow and subscribe so you're always part of the conversation.